The orders were clear. March them until they collapse. Forget what you saw. But decades later, the memories return. In dreams, in fragments. In the face of an Armenian girl he thought he'd forgotten. Because some histories refuse to stay buried. And sometimes, even the perpetrators remember. Hi, I'm Cindy Cruz, and this is Gateway Books by Crestance, a podcast about the link between historical fiction and real history. In every episode, we begin with a novel, then follow the threads it leaves behind, into the archives, into memoir, into fact. This time, the threads lead us into one of the most painful and often overlooked tragedies of the 20th century, the Armenian Genocide. In 1915, under the cover of war, the Ottoman Empire began the forced deportation and extermination of its Armenian population. Over 1 million people were killed, marched to their deaths, starved, abused, erased. And for decades, the world looked away. Today we begin with The Gendarme by Mustian, a novel about memory, guilt, and the past that refuses to stay buried. From there, we'll move into Armenian Golgotha, a harrowing memoir of priest and survivor Grigoris Balakian. And we'll close with Remnants, a powerful archival work that traces the marks genocide left behind, not just in history books, but in the bodies and lives of Armenian women. Some stories we tell because we want to remember, others because we must. When we meet Ahmed Khan, he's 92 years old, recovering from brain surgery in a Georgian nursing home. He's a man who believes his past is settled, who assumes, as many do at the end of life, that the story is already written. Then the dreams begin. They come without warning, vivid, unsettling, and repetitive. In them, he's not Ahmed. He is Ahmed Khan, a young gendarme in the Ottoman Empire, escorting Armenian women and children on a march through the desert. Among them, a girl named Elyse. And slowly, Ahmed realizes these aren't dreams at all. They are memories. The Gendarme is a novel of reckoning, not the public legal reckoning that history sometimes provides, but the kind that happens in private, often too late, when the body begins to fail and the mind starts telling truths it has kept buried. What makes this story so relevant is not just its subject, the Armenian Genocide, but its framing. We experience the past not through linear history, but through fragments of memory, surfacing in a man who spent most of his life not knowing or not admitting what he had done. Ahmed Khan was a young soldier during World War I, tasked with escorting a caravan of Armenian deportees. But escort is a euphemism. These were not relocations. These were death marches, long, deliberate acts of attrition. The objective was not transportation. It was elimination, slowly, cruelly, out of sight. At first, Ahmed is dutiful. He follows orders. He believes what he's been told, that Armenians are a threat to the empire, that this is necessary, that loyalty means obedience. But when he meets Elyse, something in him shifts. She is proud, defiant, a girl who will not disappear quietly. Their connection is strained and asymmetrical, distorted by power, circumstance, and violence. Whatever feelings emerge between them are tangled in the brutal reality of her captivity. There is no space for purity in a relationship like this, no real possibility of mutuality. And Mustian does not pretend otherwise. This is not a story about redemptive love. It's a story glimpsed through the surface of denial and asking to be fully seen. Back in the nursing home, Emmett struggles to reconcile the man he has become with the boy he once was. His memories are scattered, dreamlike, out of sequence, but they begin to form a path. He starts to write letters, to research, to try, in the time he has left, to learn what became of Elyse, whether she survived, whether she even remembered him, whether, if she did, she remembered fear or longing or both. And most haunting of all, whether he deserves to be remembered at all. Mustian's narrative moves between past and present. The structure itself mirrors the trauma it explores, fractured, recursive, never quite whole. We shift between Emmet's walking life and Ahmed's memories, with imagined scenes surfacing like waves. The boundaries between reflection and reality blur, much like they do in late-stage memory. But what grounds the novel is its refusal to offer comfort. Emmet is not redeemed. He is not forgiven. He does not uncover a secret that absolves him. Instead, the gendarme asks a harder question. What happens when a man begins to remember only when it's too late to make amends? And what does that mean for history, for justice, for the way we live with the things we've done? In the absence of a courtroom, Emmet's reckoning is internal. There is no punishment, no public confession, no audience, only dreams and guilt, and the knowledge that what he remembers cannot be undone. The story is fictional, but its foundation is historical. Gendarmes like Ahmed Khan were real. They were the foot soldiers of the deportation process. Young, poorly trained, often swept up in nationalistic rhetoric, and given extraordinary power over people they had been taught to see as threats. Most disappeared into post-war life. Few were ever held accountable. Mustian draws on this silence, not to fill it with spectacle, but to show what it means to carry history inside a person who has tried not to know it. Emmet's family, his doctors, the people around him, none of them know what he is remembering. To them, he is simply old. But inside, his past is unraveling. His identity is fracturing. And what remains is not peace, but proximity to a truth he no longer has time to escape. Araxi, too, is not portrayed as a symbol. She is not the moral compass. She is not romanticized. Her presence in the novel is shaped like Emmet's failing memory. But even through that haze, she resists simplification. She is sharp, resistant, unwilling to be reduced to what was done to her. She may have been a victim of the system, but she is never passive. Even in fragments, she stands proud. And that makes her unforgettable. What the gendarme ultimately offers is not resolution, but a reminder that history is not always processed at the right time, in the right way, or by the right people. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it surfaces, not in tribunals, but in hospital beds. Not in grand gestures, but in the stillness of memory returning. To understand the full weight of what happened, not in dreams, but in lived experience, we turn next to a man who survived the marches. Grigoris Balakian was a priest, an intellectual, and one of the few who bore witness to the atrocities from the inside and lived to write them down. In Armenian Golgotha, a memoir of the Armenian Genocide, he does not imagine. He remembers, in detail, in pain, and in defiance of silence. There is nothing abstract about Grigoris Balakian's account. In Armenian Golgotha, the Armenian Genocide is not a historical event to be studied or interpreted. It is a lived, minute-by-minute ordeal, told by a man who should not have survived it. A priest, a writer, a scholar, and above all, a witness. Balakian was among the 250 Armenian intellectuals arrested on April 24, 1915 in Constantinople, the day now marked as the beginning of the genocide. His memoir is both personal and collective, an effort not to just survive, but to remember on behalf of those who could not. Where the gendarme gives us the fragmented dreams of a man who may have participated in atrocity, Armenian Golgotha offers the clarity of one who endured it. What Balakian records is not dreamlike, but brutally unforgettable and real. The first half of his memoir covers his deportation and internment. He is hurted, alongside poets, journalists, teachers, and clergy. A generation of Armenian leadership methodically targeted for elimination. As the intellectual class is dismantled, the deportations begin. Balakian is moved from camp to camp, from one form of captivity to another, always under threat, always aware that death may be only hours away. He sees the bodies dumped into ravines, hears the silence of those too traumatized to speak. He walks among the living who already look like ghosts. And yet he keeps observing, recording, naming. Balakian becomes a vessel for memory, absorbing what others will not live to recount. His writing is vivid, not because it embellishes, but because he refuses to turn away. He describes the stench of unburied corpses, the negotiations for survival, the way people disappear not in waves, but one by one, a slow erasure, made bureaucratic and systematic. The genocide in Balakian's telling is not a collapse of order, but a function of it. Gendarmes accompany the deportees. Civilians sign orders. Soldiers carry them out with efficiency. There is no question of chaos. What he sees is administration, cold, precise, and designed to dehumanize. But Balakian also bears witness to something else, the fragility of moral choices under pressure. Not all perpetrators are monsters. Some are cowards. Some are opportunists. A few held in secret. Balakian survives in part because of unexpected acts. A guard who warns him. A stranger who lies for him. A Kurdish tribal leader who sees in him something worth protecting. These moments don't redeem the system. They highlight how deeply people had to bend to retain even a shred of dignity. The second half of the memoir follows Balakian's escape. Disguised as a German engineer, aided by sympathetic officials and his own fluency in multiple languages, he makes his way across Anatolia, hiding, bargaining, and constantly measuring risk. He sees other survivors along the way, reduced to silence or madness, and he never stops writing. And when he finally reaches safety, he doesn't rest. He writes because he knows, even then, that denial will follow. What makes Armenian Golgotha so powerful is not just its content, but its intention. Balakian is not simply describing what happened. He is fighting, through language, to keep the memory alive. He wants the reader to see, to carry, to see the weight. His writing is not patterned. It is urgent. The prose moves quickly, sometimes abruptly, as if driven by the fear that memory might slip away before it is fully recorded. Throughout the memoir, Balakian returns to one question. What is the role of witness? What responsibility does the survivor have to the dead? He does not speak for them, but he names them. He remembers them. And in doing so, he calls the reader into that responsibility too. In the broader history of genocide literature, Armenian Golgotha holds a unique place. It is one of the earliest and most detailed survivor accounts of any genocide in the 20th century. And yet for decades, it remained largely unread in the West. Published in Armenian in 1922, it wasn't translated into English until 2009. That delay is telling. The genocide itself was followed by silence, political, historical, and cultural. The new Turkish Republic denied it. Western powers abandoned their promises of justice. And within that silence, entire generations grew up not knowing what had been done. Balakian's memoir breaks that silence. It documents not just the atrocities, but the machinery behind them, the policies, the orders, the rationalizations. He names Ottoman officials, describes routes, cites dates. He does not allow history to hide in abstraction. And yet, Armenian Golgotha is not only a record of death, it is also a record of endurance, of language surviving horror, of a man choosing, in the face of everything, to keep bearing witness. If the gendarme asks what it means to remember from the margins of guilt, Armenian Golgotha demands we face memory from the center of pain. There is no redemption here, no poetic closure, only survival, and the heavy task of remembrance. There are moments as you read when the language itself seems to tremble. Balakian was writing as a priest, a man of faith who had seen his church desecrated, his people scattered. And still, he writes not with vengeance, but with conviction. He does not look for heroes, he looks for truth. That, in the end, is the gift Armenian Golgotha offers, and the burden it leaves behind. It does not allow us to say, we did not know. It does not let us off the hook. It does not let us look away. It asks only that we carry the memory and refuse in whatever way we can to let it disappear. Grigoris Balakian gave us the horror in full voice, recorded, dated, named. But what are the stories that were never written down? What of the women who had no chance to speak, or were punished when they did? In Remnants, embodied archives of the Armenian Genocide, Elyse Semerdjian searches for those stories, not in books or interviews, but in scars, in silence, and in the physical traces left behind when the world tried to move on. This is not a conventional archive. It cannot be cataloged by title or shelved by theme. The women at the heart of this history were often abducted, enslaved, renamed, converted, married off, tattooed, or erased. Many never returned to Armenian communities. Others returned only to be cast out, reminders too visible of what had been done to them. Semerdjian does not try to complete their stories. She tries to listen to what remains. The book opens not with certainty, but with fragments, the very thing genocide produces. It dismantles families, lineages, testimony. What remains are the remnants. Blue-black tattoos on forearms, Ottoman court transcripts with partial witness statements, police records, missionary files, photographs with no names. From these fragments, Semerdjian constructs an embodied archive, a concept as radical as it is necessary. She asks, what does it mean when the body itself becomes the record? For Armenian women absorbed into Muslim households during and after the genocide, the body was often the only thing they retained. They lost their names, their language, their families, and yet their bodies bore witness through the marks of survival, through pregnancies, through visible and invisible wounds. Many were forcibly tattooed. In some regions, particularly in the Syrian desert and among the Bedouin communities, tattoos were used to mark ownership, to brand Armenian women as property. These were not decorative. These were tools of erasure, layered with both humiliation and permanence. But in an unforeseeable twist, those same marks would later become proof. In refugee camps and orphanages, aid workers sometimes identified Armenian women by their tattoos. Symbols that had once been used to erase identity now became clues to help recover it. Semerdjian approaches these stories with extreme care. She does not use their trauma to provoke sympathy. She uses it to demand recognition. Every mark, every bureaucratic note, every disrupted life is treated not as a symbol, but as a trace of real people, real pain, real complexity. This is what makes Remnants extraordinary. It is not just a history of violence. It is a history of what violence leaves behind and what communities over generations choose to remember or bury. There are no easy moral grounds in this material. Missionaries who rescued Armenian women often did so on the condition of moral conformity. Survivors were judged not by what they had endured, but by whether they could be seen as acceptable again. Virgins, Christians, wives. Those who had borne children in captivity were sometimes forced to give them up. In some cases, they were given new clothes, new names, and told never to speak of what had happened. What Semerdjian exposes is not just the brutality of the genocide, but the gendered politics of memory that followed. These women became both sacred and shameful, revered in theory, but rejected in practice. Their bodies bore the weight of survival, but their communities often refused to carry it with them. And so Semerdjian turns to archives, but not the kind of archive she's used to. She mined Ottoman court records, NGO files, missionary photographs, and ethnographic field notes, reading between the lines for what they did not intend to preserve. She shows us how control of woman, of memory, of historical narrative played out in small, chilling details. A police officer noting a woman's tattoo, a village elder requesting that she not be returned, an official form that replaces her Armenian name with a Muslim one. These are not the stories of heroes or martyrs. These are the stories of the unnamed, the unclaimed, the girls who survived, only to find that survival itself was a kind of exile. And still, the remnants remain. Remnant is not chronological. It does not offer resolution. It loops and fragments, mimicking the shape of the archive itself. Some women reappear across chapters, others vanish. The very structure of the book resists closure, a powerful refusal to simplify what cannot be simplified. Placed in conversation with the Gendarme and Armenian Golgotha, Semerdjian's work completes a triad, not by echoing them, but by resisting their forms. Where Mustian gave us one man's reckoning with complicity, and Balakian gave us the defiant record of survival, Semerdjian gives us the aftermath, the long, quiet work of piecing together the lives that history did not preserve. She does not offer a single voice. She offers a lens, partial, ruptured, and human. Perhaps the most haunting thing about Remnants is its refusal to look away. Every time we try to move past a page, another detail pulls us back. A girl taken at 8 and photographed years later, veiled and renamed. A woman who crosses a border only to be turned away at the very people who share her blood. A tattoo that outlives its captor. This is the legacy of a genocide that sought not only to kill, but to erase, and a woman who survived in ways that no one wanted to talk about. Semerdjian does not speak. She does not tell us what they would have said. She honors the fact that many did not get the chance. But she tells us what their bodies, their files, their traces have whispered, and what we have been too slow or too afraid to hear. Remnants is an act of scholarly devotion. It teaches us how to read the silences, how to find the archive that lives not in the text, but in the scar, in the photograph, in the shame that should not have belonged to them. What do we do with what remains? Semerdjian doesn't give us an answer, but she allows us to hold it, how to see it without trying to resolve it, how to listen when all that's left is the void, the silence, and the echo of surviving. There are stories we tell because they inspire. There are others we tell because they warn. And then there are stories we carry because forgetting them would be a second to violence. This episode has taken us to difficult places, to a gendarme remembering too late, to a priest who wrote in the shadow of mass death, to the bodies of women marked not just by trauma, but by the world's discomfort with their survival. None of these accounts offer easy lessons. There is no closure here, but there is clarity, there is truth, and there is the insistence across fiction, memoir, and historical archive that the Armenian Genocide was real and that the silence surrounding it is a choice. The stories in this episode have crossed borders and generations to reach us. What we do with them is up to us. Thank you for spending this time with me on Gateway Books by Crestance. If you'd like to explore past episodes, discover reading lists, or bring a little of the reading life into your own space, you'll find all of that and more at crestance.com. Please like, subscribe, and share if this story moved you. And above all, keep reading and keep remembering.